list of serial killers who suffered traumatic brain injuries in their youth. John Gacy, the killer clown. At age 6, his father beat him unconscious with a broomstick. At 11, he suffered a blood clot in his brain after being hit in the head with a swing. These head traumas resulted in regular blackouts. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. At age 2, a dresser fell on top of Ramirez, gashing open his head and knocking him unconscious. At 5, he was knocked unconscious by a swing, causing a deep laceration on his head that required 30 stitches. Like Gacy, he too suffered physical abuse at the hands of his father. David Berkowitz, the son of Sam. As a child, Berkowitz badly injured his head at least 3 times, running into a wall, getting hit with a lead pipe, and getting struck down by a car. Dennis Rader, the BTK killer. Rader suffered brain damage as a toddler when his mother dropped him on his head. He lost consciousness and even turned blue before being revived, suggesting that he may have been dead for a short period of time. Richard Chase, the vampire of Sacramento. Chase suffered numerous head injuries as a child and throughout his life. Ed Gein, the butcher of Plainfield. Gein was regularly beaten by his father, who often hit him so hard that his ears would ring. He would suffer constant blackouts, and the blows to the head are believed to have caused Gein's speech impediment. Henry Lee Lucas, the confession killer. Lucas was also beaten severely as a child. In one attack, his mother smashed a heavy plank of wood over his head, causing him to spend 3 days in a coma. At age 10, he developed an infection in his left eye after one of his brothers struck him with a knife. His mother ignored the injury for several days until a teacher swiped him over the eye with a steel-tipped ruler, and the eyeball burst. It had to be surgically removed and replaced with a glass prosthetic. Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper. Sutcliffe's mother was beaten while she was pregnant with him. He was born 5 days premature and was starved of oxygen at his birth, resulting in his being incubated for 10 days. At 5 years old, his father smashed a beer bottle over his head at the Christmas table. Albert Fish, the Brooklyn vampire. At age 7, Fish had a severe head injury after falling from a cherry tree, causing permanent problems such as headaches and dizzy spells. Bobby Joe Long, the classified ad rapist. Throughout his childhood, Long suffered several head injuries, resulting in dizziness and nausea. Fred West, the House of Horrors killer. At 17, West suffered a fractured skull in a motorcycle accident, which left him unconscious for 7 days. 2 years later, he fell 2 floors on a fire escape. Both injuries caused him to black out frequently. Glenn Rogers, the cross-country killer. As a child, Rogers was regularly punched in the head by his mother. He would also rock himself violently and uncontrollably, frequently falling off chairs, banging his head on walls and floors. Alexander Pichushkin, the chessboard killer. As a child, Pichushkin injured his head badly after falling backwards off a swing. The swing struck his forehead as it swung back, damaging his frontal cortex and drastically altering his personality. Carlton Gary, the Stalking Strangler. At 8 years old, Gary was knocked unconscious in a playground accident, though the exact details are unspecific. Gary Heidnik, the real Buffalo Bill. Heidnik fell from a tree at age 6 and hit his head so hard that it resulted in his skull being oddly shaped, for which he was mercilessly teased by the other children, who called him Football Head. Jerry Brudos, the shoe fetish slayer, was dangerously electrocuted as a child and afterwards complained of recurring blackouts and migraine headaches. Arthur Shawcross, the Genesee River killer. Shawcross was beaten severely as a child by his father and suffered 2 serious head injuries after being struck in the head by a sports discus and falling off of a ladder. And of course, these are the head injuries of serial killers that have been reported. So what does this tell us? Research indicates that the brains of individuals who commit homicide exhibit reduced gray matter and decreased functioning in the brain's orbitofrontal cortex and left temporal lobes, responsible for emotional processing, social cognition, and long-term memory. Findings emphasize that the brains of murderers are vastly different from those of other offenders, such as bank robbers. But it's important to note that not all serial killers suffer from traumatic brain injuries. After the execution of Ted Bundy, his brain was examined during the autopsy. No evidence of structural abnormalities, such as lesions, growths, deformities, or noticeable injuries were found. So it was reported that there were no indications of brain damage that happened throughout Bundy's life. Had neuroscientists studied Bundy's active brain while he was alive, the findings may have told a different story. At the time of the autopsy, the understanding of brain damage was limited. Arguably, the only way to accurately examine potential damages would have been to study Bundy's brain while he was living using fMRI. Also, an important aspect missing from the list is the long-lasting brain damage resulting from early childhood sexual abuse, a topic that historically remains significantly underreported, particularly by male survivors. It is highly likely that most serial killers suffered from some form of childhood sexual abuse. Participants in studies who experienced childhood sexual abuse exhibited a significantly smaller cortical gray matter volume in specific regions of the brain, including the right middle occipital gyrus, right pars orbitalis, and left superior posterior parietal lobe when compared to individuals without such experiences. It should be noted that this association was not observed in survivors of other forms of abuse such as physical or emotional. A study involving sexual predators who opted for castration to suppress their desires towards children revealed this intervention did not eliminate their urge to offend. Surprisingly, their predatory tendencies were not connected to a sexual drive. Rather, the predators reported that their drive stemmed from the desire to hurt the child as deeply as possible. Think about that. Just to be clear, the development of a serial killer is not solely connected to brain damage resulting from sexual abuse or physical head injuries. Extreme acts of violence, such as committing homicide, often emerge from a complex interplay between biological, psychological, and sociological factors. Let me know in the comments if there's someone on this list who you'd like me to explore more deeply.